Welcome to True Crime Stories for English Learners, where real-life mysteries meet clear and simple English.
The Charming Killer, Ted Bundy. The young woman walked across a college campus on a sunny afternoon in 1974. She was carrying books, heading to class, thinking about her studies and her plans for the weekend. A handsome man approached her, his arm in a sling, struggling to carry books to his car. "Excuse me," he said with a friendly smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you help me? I hurt my arm and I'm having trouble." She hesitated for just a moment, but he seemed nice and he was injured. It would only take a minute to help. "Sure," she said, and followed him toward the parking lot. She never made it to class. She was never seen alive again. This was how Ted Bundy hunted. He was handsome, charming, and intelligent. He looked like the kind of man you could trust, the kind your parents would approve of, the kind who would never hurt anyone. But behind that attractive mask was one of the most brutal serial killers in American history. A man who murdered at least 30 young women, possibly many more. A man who enjoyed not just the killing, but the terror, the control, and the memories of what he had done. This is the story of Ted Bundy, how a seemingly perfect man became a monster, how he evaded capture for years, and how his eventual arrest and trial became a media spectacle that changed how America viewed serial killers forever. The making of a monster. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, but his life began with shame and deception. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was 22 years old and unmarried when she became pregnant. In 1946, being an unwed mother carried enormous social stigma. Eleanor's father was reportedly violent and abusive, and the family was deeply religious. The pregnancy was a scandal. To hide the shame, the family concocted a lie. Baby Theodore was raised believing his grandparents were his parents and that his mother was his older sister. This deception lasted for years. Ted didn't learn the truth until he was a teenager, and the discovery devastated him. The foundation of his identity was built on a lie. The people he trusted most had deceived him about who he was. Ted's biological father remains unknown. Eleanor claimed he was a sailor named Lloyd Marshall who had abandoned her, but some family members suggested Ted might have been the product of incest with Eleanor's own father. Ted himself would later claim his father was a respectable man from a good family, but he never provided proof. The mystery of his paternity haunted him throughout his life. In 1951, when Ted was 4 years old, Eleanor moved with him to Tacoma, Washington. She wanted a fresh start, away from the judgment and gossip of Vermont. In 1952, she married Johnny Bundy, a hospital cook. Johnny adopted Ted, giving him the last name Bundy. The family grew with the birth of several more children. By all accounts, Johnny Bundy was a decent man who tried to be a good father to Ted, but Ted never bonded with him. He resented Johnny, viewing him as lower class and beneath him. Ted was already developing a sense of entitlement and superiority. He believed he was special, that he deserved better than the working-class life his family lived. As a child and teenager, Ted appeared normal on the surface. He was intelligent and did well in school. He was good-looking and charming when he wanted to be. But there were signs of darkness even then. Neighbors later recalled disturbing incidents. One relative remembered waking up to find 3-year-old Ted placing kitchen knives around her body while she slept. Another family member described him as having a mean streak and taking pleasure in hurting animals. Ted was also a compulsive liar from an early age. He would make up elaborate stories to make himself seem more important or interesting. He shoplifted regularly, stealing things he didn't need just for the thrill. He was arrested twice as a juvenile for burglary and auto theft, though the charges were dismissed. Even then, the pattern was forming. Ted believed rules didn't apply to him. In high school, Ted was shy and awkward around girls. He desperately wanted to be popular and admired, but he didn't fit in with the wealthy, popular crowd he envied. This rejection fed his growing resentment and sense of grievance. He felt entitled to success and admiration, but couldn't achieve it, and he began to hate those who had what he wanted. The college years and the relationship that defined him. In 1966, Ted enrolled at the University of Washington to study Chinese. He was intelligent enough to succeed academically, but he lacked direction and purpose. That changed when he met Stephanie Brooks, a pseudonym used to protect her identity. Stephanie was everything Ted thought he wanted. She was beautiful, sophisticated, came from a wealthy California family, and seemed to represent the upper-class world Ted yearned to join. Ted fell obsessively in love with her. For the first time, he felt like he belonged to the world he had always envied. But the relationship was unequal. Ted was completely devoted to Stephanie, while she viewed him as a college boyfriend, someone fun but not serious. In 1968, after dating for about 2 years, Stephanie broke up with Ted. She told him he was directionless, that he lacked ambition, that he was going nowhere in life. She moved back to California and moved on. Ted was devastated. The rejection crushed him. He dropped out of college and spent the next few years drifting, working low-level jobs, struggling with depression and rage. Stephanie's rejection became the defining trauma of his life, fueling his hatred of women and his need to control them. But then, Ted did something remarkable. He reinvented himself. He went back to school, this time studying psychology. He became involved in politics, working on Republican campaigns. He volunteered at a crisis hotline, where he was reportedly good at talking to people in distress. He even worked at a crime prevention organization, writing pamphlets about rape prevention. The irony would later be horrifying. Ted transformed himself into exactly what Stephanie had said he wasn't: ambitious, successful, going somewhere. In 1973, he contacted Stephanie again. She was impressed by his transformation. They briefly rekindled their relationship. But this time, Ted was in control. Once he had proven to himself that he could win her back, that he had the power, he abruptly ended the relationship. He had gotten his revenge for her earlier rejection. This pattern, obsession, rejection, transformation, revenge, would define not just Ted's relationship with Stephanie, but his entire approach to women. And soon, his need for control and revenge would escalate beyond emotional games into something far more deadly. The killings began. In January 1974, women started disappearing in the Seattle area. The first confirmed victim was Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old student at the University of Washington. She vanished from her basement apartment on January 31st. Her bed was neatly made, but blood was found on her pillow and nightgown. She was simply gone, as if she had evaporated. More disappearances followed. Donna Gail Manson in March, Susan Rancourt in April, Roberta Parks in May, Brenda Ball in June. All were young women, most were college students, all disappeared without a trace. Police had no bodies, no crime scenes, no clear evidence of foul play, just missing women and terrified communities. Then came July 14, 1974, a day that would break the case open. At Lake Sammamish State Park, a popular recreation area near Seattle, multiple women reported being approached by a handsome man with his arm in a sling. He said his name was Ted and asked for help loading a sailboat onto his car. 2 women, Janice Ott and Denise Nasland, were seen leaving with him. Neither was ever seen alive again. Witnesses provided detailed descriptions of Ted: attractive, well-groomed, driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle. One witness even heard him introduce himself by name. Police released composite sketches and asked for the public's help. Several people who knew Ted Bundy thought the sketch looked like him and called in tips. But Ted seemed so normal, so nice. Surely it couldn't be him. Throughout 1974, Ted continued killing, but he also continued his normal life. He was in a serious relationship with a woman named Elizabeth Klopfer, who later changed her name to Elizabeth Kendall. Liz had a young daughter from a previous relationship, and Ted played the role of devoted boyfriend and father figure. Liz had no idea that Ted was hunting and murdering women during this same period. In late 1974, Ted moved to Salt Lake City to attend law school at the University of Utah. He had been accepted based on his impressive undergraduate record and his work in politics and crisis prevention. On the surface, he was achieving everything he had always wanted: education, respectability, and success. But the killings didn't stop. They just moved with him. In Utah, Colorado, and Idaho, young women began disappearing. The pattern was similar: attractive, college-aged women with long, dark hair parted in the middle. They all resembled Stephanie Brooks, Ted's ex-girlfriend. Police across multiple states were investigating missing persons cases, not yet realizing they were all connected to the same killer. Ted's method was calculated and effective. He would approach women in public places, often pretending to be injured or disabled to gain sympathy. He might wear a fake cast or use crutches. He would ask for help carrying something to his car. Once the woman was isolated, he would attack, usually knocking her unconscious with a weapon he kept hidden. He would take his victims to remote locations where he could rape and murder them without being interrupted. He would keep some bodies for days, returning to the corpses to engage in necrophilia. He took photographs of some victims in various poses. He decapitated several victims and kept their heads as souvenirs. The level of depravity was extraordinary. But Ted was careful. He usually dumped bodies far from where he abducted victims. He scattered remains across multiple sites to make identification difficult. He cleaned his car obsessively. He burned or disposed of evidence. For years, police had no physical evidence connecting the disappearances, no witnesses who saw the actual abductions, and no clear suspect. The capture and escape. On August 16, 1975, Ted's luck finally ran out. Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward noticed a tan Volkswagen Beetle driving slowly through a residential neighborhood late at night. When Hayward tried to pull the car over, it sped away. After a brief chase, the driver stopped. It was Ted Bundy. Ted claimed he was lost and had panicked when he saw the police car. But when Hayward searched the vehicle, he found suspicious items: handcuffs, an ice pick, a crowbar, rope, and a ski mask. These were clearly tools for abduction. Ted was arrested, though at this point, police didn't connect him to the murders. They thought they had caught a burglar. But one detective, Jerry Thompson, thought the arrest might be related to a local kidnapping case. A woman named Carol Duranch had been abducted several months earlier but had escaped. She described her attacker and his car. The description matched Ted Bundy perfectly. Police arranged a lineup. Carol Duranch identified Ted as the man who had abducted her. He had approached her at a shopping mall claiming to be a police officer, saying someone had tried to break into her car. When she followed him to his Volkswagen, he attacked her, trying to handcuff her. But Carol fought back and escaped, saving her own life. Based on Carol's identification and the items found in his car, Ted was charged with aggravated kidnapping. In February 1976, he was convicted and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. While in prison, police continued investigating him for the murders. They were building their case, collecting evidence, connecting Ted to multiple missing women. In 1977, Ted was charged with murder in Colorado in the death of Karen Campbell, who had disappeared from a ski resort in 1975. He was extradited to Colorado to stand trial. During a court hearing in June 1977, Ted was allowed to use the law library to research his case. While there, he jumped out of a second-story window and escaped. Ted was free for 6 days. He was captured in the mountains, tired and hungry. But he had proven something important. He was willing to take risks. He was capable of escape, and he would not accept his fate passively. After the first escape, security should have been tighter, but somehow it wasn't. On December 30th, 1977, Ted escaped again. This time, he had lost weight to fit through a small opening in the ceiling of his cell. He climbed through the crawl space above the jail and escaped through a jailer's apartment. By the time anyone noticed he was gone, Ted was already far away. The final murders. Ted fled to Florida using stolen credit cards and fake identities. He should have laid low, disappeared, started a new life under a different name. But Ted couldn't stop killing. It was the one thing he truly loved, the one thing that made him feel powerful and alive. On January 15, 1978, just 2 weeks after his escape, Ted broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in Tallahassee. In less than 15 minutes, he attacked 4 women as they slept. He beat them with a piece of wood, strangled some, bit one on the buttocks and breast. 2 women, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, died from their injuries. 2 others, Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, survived but were severely injured. The attack was frenzied and reckless, completely different from Ted's usually careful methods. He left evidence everywhere. Witnesses saw him leaving the sorority house. He had been spotted in the area. The Chi Omega attack would ultimately provide the physical evidence that would convict him. Less than an hour after the Chi Omega attack, Ted broke into another apartment 8 blocks away and attacked Cheryl Thomas, a dance student. He beat her severely, leaving her with permanent hearing loss and other injuries, but Cheryl survived. Ted's final victim was 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. On February 9, 1978, Kimberly disappeared from her school in Lake City, Florida. Ted abducted her, raped her, and murdered her. Her body was found 8 weeks later in an abandoned pig shed. She was his youngest known victim, and her death was particularly brutal and horrifying. By this time, police across multiple states were searching for Ted. His photograph was in newspapers and on television. On February 15, 1978, a police officer in Pensacola, Florida, pulled over a stolen car. The driver acted suspiciously and tried to run. After a brief struggle, the officer arrested him. The man gave a fake name, but police soon discovered his real identity, Ted Bundy. This time, Ted wouldn't escape. He was held in maximum security, facing murder charges in Florida. The killing spree was finally over. The trials and the media circus. Ted's trials became media sensations. He was charming and good-looking. He represented himself in court at times, playing the role of attorney with confidence and skill. He was articulate and intelligent, nothing like the image most people had of a serial killer. The media was fascinated. The trial for the Chi Omega murders began in June 1979. The evidence against Ted was strong. Witnesses placed him near the sorority house. Bite marks on Lisa Levy's body matched Ted's teeth. This was the physical evidence that would ultimately convict him. Despite Ted's attempts to defend himself and his courtroom theatrics, the jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. In 1980, Ted was tried for the murder of Kimberly Leach. Again, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Ted would spend the next 9 years on death row, filing appeals, giving interviews, and continuing to manipulate anyone who would listen. During his time in prison, Ted corresponded with many people. including true crime writer Anne Rule, who had worked with him at the crisis hotline years earlier. Anne had considered Ted a friend and was shocked to learn he was a serial killer. She would later write The Stranger Beside Me, one of the most famous true crime books ever published. Ted also gave interviews to FBI agents and psychologists who wanted to understand how serial killers think. He spoke about his crimes in the third person, as if discussing someone else, describing the killer as he rather than I. This allowed Ted to talk about his murders while maintaining psychological distance from them. In these interviews, Ted revealed disturbing details about his methods and motivations. He described how he would use his charm to gain trust, how he would choose victims who resembled his ex-girlfriend, how he kept souvenirs and photographs, how he would return to dump sites to have sex with decomposing bodies. He also admitted that his confirmed victim count of 30 was likely much lower than his actual total. Some experts believe Ted may have killed over 100 women. Ted claimed that pornography had influenced him, that violent images had corrupted his mind. But most experts believe this was another manipulation, Ted trying to shift blame away from himself. He was a narcissist and psychopath who killed because he enjoyed it, because it made him feel powerful, and because he could. Pornography was an excuse, not a cause. The final interview and execution. As Ted's execution date approached in January 1989, he began confessing to additional murders, providing details about victims whose cases had been unsolved for years. Some people believed he was genuinely trying to bring closure to families. Others believed he was simply trying to delay his execution, offering information in exchange for more time. Just hours before his execution, Ted gave a final interview to Dr. James Dobson, a Christian evangelist. In this interview, Ted again blamed pornography for his crimes and warned about its dangers. Many people found the interview disturbing. Ted was using his final hours to spread lies and manipulate public opinion, rather than taking genuine responsibility for what he had done. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. He was 42 years old. Outside the prison, crowds gathered to celebrate his death. Some held signs saying, "Burn Bundy, burn," and cheered when the execution was announced. It was a grotesque spectacle, but it reflected the intense public emotion Ted's crimes had generated. Ted's final words to his attorney were about his victims' families. "Give my love to my family and friends." He said nothing about the women he had murdered or their families. Even at the end, Ted was thinking only of himself. Understanding Ted Bundy. What made Ted Bundy kill? Psychologists have spent decades trying to understand him. Several factors seem to have contributed. First, Ted was a narcissist. He believed he was superior to other people, that normal rules didn't apply to him, that he was special and destined for greatness. When reality didn't match this self-image, when he faced rejection or failure, he couldn't cope. Killing gave him a sense of power and control that his real life lacked. Second, Ted was a psychopath. He lacked empathy and genuine emotional connections. He could mimic normal emotions and charm people, but he didn't actually feel compassion or care for others. People were objects to him, tools to be used or toys to be played with. Third, Ted had deep-seated rage toward women. His mother's deception about his birth, Stephanie's rejection, his inability to connect authentically with women, all of this created anger that he expressed through violence. The women he killed resembled Stephanie, suggesting he was symbolically murdering her over and over again. Fourth, Ted was addicted to killing. He described the compulsion to hunt and murder as similar to drug addiction. The planning, the hunt, the capture, the kill, the time with the bodies afterward, all of it gave him pleasure and satisfaction he couldn't find elsewhere. Like an addict chasing a high, Ted kept killing because nothing else made him feel the same way. Finally, Ted enjoyed the game. He loved outwitting police, manipulating people, maintaining his innocent appearance while secretly committing horrible crimes. The double life thrilled him. Being Ted Bundy, respected law student and political worker by day, and a brutal killer by night, gave him a sense of superiority. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. But was Ted always this way? Or did something specific make him into a killer? Experts disagree. Some believe Ted was born with psychopathic traits that were then shaped by his early experiences. Others believe that if he had been raised differently, if he had received help earlier, he might not have become a killer. We'll never know for certain. What we do know is that Ted Bundy was responsible for his actions. Whatever his psychology, whatever his childhood experiences, he made choices. He chose to stalk women. He chose to abduct them. He chose to rape and murder them. He could have stopped at any time, but didn't. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He took elaborate precautions to avoid being caught, which shows he understood his actions were criminal. Ted Bundy was not a victim. He was a predator who made deliberate choices to hurt people. The impact on society. The Ted Bundy case changed how America views serial killers. Before Bundy, most people imagined serial killers as obviously crazy, disturbed loners who looked dangerous. Ted proved that serial killers could be charming, attractive, and seemingly normal. They could be anyone, your neighbor, your coworker, the friendly stranger who asks for help. This realization was terrifying. It meant you couldn't trust appearances. It meant danger could come from someone who seemed safe. Parents warned their children to be careful even of people who seemed nice. Women became more conscious about helping strangers or accepting invitations. The case also highlighted the dangers of fragmented law enforcement. Ted killed across multiple states, and different police departments didn't share information effectively. If agencies had communicated better, Ted might have been caught earlier. The case helped lead to better systems for tracking serial criminals across jurisdictions. Ted's trials were some of the first to be televised nationally. Millions of people watched him in court, fascinated by his appearance and demeanor. This began the modern era of true crime as entertainment. Before Ted Bundy, serial killers were usually reported matter-of-factly in the news. After Ted Bundy, they became cultural figures, subjects of books, documentaries, and endless speculation. This attention has both positive and negative aspects. On one hand, public interest in true crime has led to cold cases being solved, wrongful convictions being overturned, and improvements in criminal justice. On the other hand, it risks glorifying killers and turning victims into footnotes in the killer's stories. Remembering Ted Bundy's victims. In telling Ted Bundy's story, it's critical that we remember his victims, at least 30 young women whose lives were stolen. Here are some of them. Linda Ann Healy, 21, was a psychology student and radio announcer. She was intelligent, kind, and had her whole life ahead of her. Donna Gail Manson, 19, was studying to be an environmental scientist. She was thoughtful and cared deeply about nature. Susan Rancourt, 18, was a biology major who loved the outdoors. Her family described her as adventurous and loving. Roberta Brenda Parks, 22, was studying cultural anthropology. She had survived cancer as a child and was determined to make the most of her life. Georgie Ann Hawkins, 18, was a popular student planning to become a teacher. She disappeared just steps from her sorority house. Janice Ott, 23, and Denise Nosland, 19, were both abducted from Lake Sammamish. Janice was a probation caseworker helping troubled youth. Denise was described as gentle and kind. Karen Campbell, 23, was a nurse on a ski trip with her fiancé. They were planning their wedding. Julie Cunningham, 26, was a ski instructor. She loved the mountains and the outdoors. Melissa Smith, 17, was the daughter of a police chief. She was beautiful and talented. Laura Aim, 17, was known for her infectious smile and loving personality. Deborah Kent, 17, disappeared from her high school play. Her family never stopped searching for answers. Margaret Bowman, 21, and Lisa Levy, 20, were murdered in the Omega House. Margaret was an artist. Lisa was studying fashion merchandising. Kimberly Leach, 12, was the youngest known victim. She was a child with her whole life ahead of her. These are just some of Ted Bundy's victims. There were likely many others whose murders were never definitively attributed to him. Each of these women was a complete person with dreams, relationships, and potential. They deserve to be remembered as individuals, not just as entries on a list of Ted Bundy's victims. Lessons from a monster. What can we learn from the Ted Bundy case? First, trust your instincts. Many of Ted's potential victims felt uncomfortable around him, but dismissed those feelings because he seemed nice and needed help. If something feels wrong, listen to that feeling. It's better to be rude to someone who turns out to be harmless than to be polite to someone who turns out to be dangerous. Second, appearances can be deceiving. Ted looked like the kind of person you could trust. He was educated, well-spoken, and attractive, but these surface characteristics don't tell you anything about someone's true nature. Character can't be judged by appearance alone. Third, early warning signs should be taken seriously. Ted had behavioral problems as a child: cruelty to animals, theft, lying. While not all children who show these signs become violent adults, they are red flags that suggest someone needs help. Early intervention might prevent future tragedies. Fourth, narcissism and entitlement are dangerous traits. Ted believed he was special, that he deserved success and admiration without earning it. When he didn't get what he felt entitled to, he became violent. Teaching children healthy self-esteem without entitlement, teaching them to handle rejection and failure constructively, might help prevent future Ted Bundys. Finally, we need to be careful about how we remember and discuss serial killers. Ted Bundy has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, movies, and discussions. Some of this attention has educational value, but some of it glorifies him, treats him as a fascinating dark celebrity rather than as a brutal murderer. We should focus more on remembering victims and understanding how to prevent future crimes, less on being fascinated by the killer himself. The Bundy effect. In the decades since his execution, Ted Bundy has become perhaps the most famous serial killer in American history. His name is instantly recognizable. His crimes have been analyzed endlessly. Actors have portrayed him in films and series, often making him seem more charismatic and appealing than he actually was. This is dangerous. Young people who weren't alive during Ted's killing spree sometimes view him through a romanticized lens. They see photos of an attractive man, hear about his intelligence and charm, and forget about the reality of what he did. The terror, the brutality, the lives destroyed. Some women have even expressed attraction to Ted Bundy, writing about how handsome he was or how they would have dated him. This reflects a disturbing tendency to find serial killers appealing when they're attractive and charming. It's a reminder that we often judge people by surface characteristics rather than by their actions and character. Ted himself would have loved this attention. He was a narcissist who craved fame and admiration. Being remembered as fascinating and attractive rather than as a brutal monster would have pleased him. In a way, by making him famous, we've given him exactly what he wanted. This is why it's so important to center victims in these stories, not killers. Ted Bundy should be remembered as a coward who preyed on young women, not as a fascinating, dark anti-hero. The women he killed should be remembered as people who mattered, whose lives had value, whose losses left real holes in the world. Final thoughts. Ted Bundy died over 30 years ago, but his crimes still resonate. His case changed how we think about serial killers, how law enforcement investigates them, and how the media covers them. He proved that evil doesn't always look evil, that monsters can wear attractive masks. But we should be careful not to give Ted Bundy more power in death than he deserves. He was not a genius. He was caught multiple times and only avoided justice for so long because of law enforcement limitations and pure luck. He was not fascinating. He was pathetic, a man so broken and rage-filled that he could only feel powerful by hurting defenseless women. He was not charming. He was manipulative, and there's a significant difference. The real story of Ted Bundy is not about Ted at all. It's about at least 30 young women who were robbed of their futures. It's about families who have lived with unbearable loss for decades. It's about the evil that humans are capable of when they lack empathy and choose violence. And it's about the importance of remembering victims, learning from tragedy, and working to prevent future crimes. Ted Bundy is dead. His victims remain dead too, their potential forever unfulfilled, their lives cut short by a man who saw them as objects rather than people. That is the real tragedy of this story. Not that a serial killer became famous, but that dozens of young women lost their lives to someone who valued his own sick pleasure over their right to exist. In the end, Ted Bundy was not special. He was not unique. He was not even particularly smart. He was simply a man who made the worst possible choices again and again until finally society said enough and ended his life. The world is better without him. And the best thing we can do now is remember him as little as possible while ensuring we never forget the women whose lives he stole.
Another dark chapter closed, but the mystery of human nature continues. Thanks for listening to True Crime Stories for English Learners. Don't forget to subscribe and join me next time for another real story that's stranger than fiction.